And we have AM Business. The debate regarding Ghana's debt stock continues as government and the opposition parties accuse each other over how the debt stock is being calculated and the exact level of the country's debt. According to the Bank of Ghana, the total debt of Ghana is nearing some 200 billion Ghana cedis. The minority in parliament says it told someone, the finance minister, to appear before the House, insisting the debt has reached unsustainable levels. However, government, through the Minister of Information, Kojo Nkrumah, has rejected claims accusing the the John Mahama administration for Ghana's current debt situation. In today's AM Business, we engage the former Finance Minister, Seth Terkper, who has interesting thoughts on Ghana's rising debt stock, while also responding to allegations of being poor at debt management.
You set up ESLA to take care of all these debt, VRA, ECG, Gradeco, all of them. And so monies they had borrowed from these banks. And I knew that, I think somewhere I heard at some point they had paid the first tranche where banks were like, okay, we are waiting, we are hoping that they will pay the rest. And till date, we're still not seeing really this thing being cleared. You set up the ESLA for 3 years, right?
Yeah, we set it with a sunset clause of 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years.
Yes.
And how many years have we done it? Why are we still doing it?
Well, that is because something happened. We said 3 to 5 years, and we're borrowing within the 3 to 5 years, okay, right? Because we felt that the ESLA revenues were coming strongly. And remember, we had promised Ghanaians that we would take the levy off, that it was meant to do a correction. You know, all of us, and then you remember we started with strategic stocks and other things to stop. We liberalized these strategic stocks to stop payment of subsidy, you know, so that we move the country to another regime, which is why petrol prices did not go up somewhere, even when the crude oil prices were scraping up. Anyway, let me assure Ghanaians that the ESLA is strong. This is the ESLA report again, and I've been looking at it. I didn't bring it just because of this interview. I've been looking at it. And the government's own projections, right? And I'm talking about projections.
Projections, yes.
Of ESLA is that in 2018, it's programmed to have brought in 3.5 billion, but the report says it actually brought in 3.1 billion.
1 billion, yeah.
Which is strong.
Which is still, I mean, you're very close to, that's about 80-90%.
Yes, in 2019, which is this year, it's supposed to bring in 3.9 billion, almost 4 billion. In 2020, it's supposed to bring in 4.5 billion.
Yeah.
In 2021, it's bringing in 5 billion, and in 2022, 4.5 billion. Now, so ESLA is strong because in 2016, overlapping into 2017, it brought about the same amount of revenue. Even with crude oil prices that were lower at the pump. Now, let me address 2 issues since you brought up ESLA. His Excellency the President, and I think that, you know, the brief given to the President should be complete. His Excellency the President stated that the NDC left $585 million US or something, about 585, I forget the figure, million US dollars from energy sector debt. Mr. President, that's why we did the ESLA. And we were very clear in the memorandum when we went to Parliament, and that's why it is called energy sector levy. The first portion, which is in the report, right here, is energy debt recovery levy.
Yes.
The report itself is saying that this year, 1.2 billion or so has been transferred to ESLA PLC.
Which should be used in settling the debt.
And the report is saying that about 5 billion of bonds have been issued by ESLA PLC. Now, if you multiply 580, you know, which is higher than what we left, but let me grant it, the 5.5 exchange rate.
Exchange rate,
yeah. It's not even, I'm not taking 5.2, but let's say 5.5. You are going to get about 3 billion, 3.3 or so, Ghana, you know, cedis.
Yeah.
That is an amount which should have been cleared from if you take only the energy sector levy, should have been cleared by now in 3 years.
In 3 years.
So
by the time we hit 2020, they should be able to clear it.
Clear it. If you took, and then if you, and I would leave out the road, the enhanced road levy, which is part of the, and all those things. If I took just the energy sector. So, Mr. President, that debt you are talking about should have been cleared by now using ESLA. So where's the ESLA money going? And remember that a bond was issued to clear those debts, which is about 5 billion. We should have cleared the debt by now. So are we mainstreaming, like petroleum revenue, are we mainstreaming the ESLA debt also? Instead of using it to serve its purposes? I'm quoting from, you know, because the ESLA bill said that we should, and these reports are good. You know, and I'm proud that we put them in the laws and in the PFMA, and Ghanaians, we can now all refer to it. So I'm saying that the information that was put out there is incomplete.
Well, what you're telling me, it makes me feel that even with ESLA, there's no need for us to even go out and borrow.
Now precisely my point, and I wrote an article on this, right?
That's the feeling I'm getting. I mean, with all the figures you have.
Yeah, let's put this in perspective, because you are saying very important, which I had written about already.
Yes.
First, we said we were going to do ESLA for 3 to 5 years, because we're convinced it will clear the energy sector, you know, debt. Okay, and some road arrears. Now, the first act, if you remember, was an ESLA PLC that issued bonds. The first one is here in the report. The first bond was for 7 years, right? It borrowed. The first bond was for 7 years.
Yes.
The other 3 bonds to date, which are in the report, I hope I can get a page, you know, are for 10 years. Implicitly, it means that we have extended the ESLA levy to 10 years. Because you can't go and tell those who are giving you the money for the bond that we are changing. So implicitly, and we did actually ask that probably this thing should go to Parliament, because there was no, we were going to go use a sunset, you know, criteria once we knew how much was coming in, to limit it, you know, to about 5 years. Now, if ESLA is bringing 3 billion average, I wouldn't even go to increasing to 5 billion. But if it's bringing 3 billion average for 10 years, you are talking about 30 billion.
Yeah.
Right? You could have borrowed, and the energy sector debt, including everything that is about 15 billion. That's what, if I have to, you know, yes. So why are we?
So half of
why
ESLA,
are we grossing up? Half of ESLA could have settled, you know, this.
With the other half probably going to settle the banking sector.
Yes, exactly.
Issues that we have.
Precisely. Because remember, there's the enhanced road. The 3 billion I'm talking about obviously includes the enhanced road levy.
Yes.
But I'm saying that even if you took 1.3 billion times 10, right? 1.3 times 10, that's a lot of money. You know, about half of that, that's about 15 billion or so, which could have, you know, settled. And then remember, we have the enhanced road levy, which is part of ESLA, which is also healthy, you know, and we could have also used that to settle the arrears owed to contractors. So why are we owing contractors? Right.
So
it's a level of expenditure, you know, which is taking many of these resources. And unfortunately, let me just repeat the point, that yes, we were very clear, we didn't hide it, right? Because we went to Parliament, right, with the amount of debt calculated, and it was the basis of that that Parliament approved the levies that were to be paid. And so if we are going to be talking about energy debt that the Mahama administration left, let's be principled and add the revenue from the levy. Remember, this was to be one of the nuisance taxes that should have gone away. And it tells us that the substantive taxes were not nuisance after all, because they are still bringing in substantial amount of revenue.
Is it not because the GRA itself has not been seen to be able to rake in the needed revenue? A lot of loopholes within those systems.
No, but this is revenue in addition to what GRA was bringing. Remember, we went to Parliament, so this was additional revenue dedicated right? Like we dedicate 2.5% to get fund, 2.5% of the VAT to NHIL. This was dedicated. So it had nothing to do with what GRA was bringing in or not. And I'm saying the report is proving that it is healthy, it is bringing in, because you pay at the pump. It's only, so implicitly, and we did actually ask that probably this thing should go to Parliament, because there was no, we were going to go use a sunset, criteria once we knew how much was coming in, to limit it, to about 5 years. Now, if Esra is bringing 3 billion average, I wouldn't even go to increasing to 5 billion. But if it's bringing 3 billion average for 10 years, you are talking about 30 billion.
Yeah.
Right? You could have borrowed, and the energy sector debt, including everything that is about 15 billion. That's what, if I have to, yes. So why are we?
So half of
why
Esra,
are we grossing up? Half of Esra could have settled, this.
With the other half probably going to settle the banking sector.
Yes, exactly.
Issues that we have.
Precisely. Because remember, there's the enhanced road. The 3 billion I'm talking about obviously includes the enhanced road levy.
Yes.
But I'm saying that even if you took 1.3 billion times 10, right? 1.3 times 10, that's a lot of money. About half of that, that's about 15 billion or so, which could have settled. And then remember, we have the enhanced road levy, which is part of ESLA, which is also healthy, and we could have also used that to settle the arrears owed to contractors. So why are we owing contractors? Right.
So
it's a level of expenditure, which is taking many of these resources. And unfortunately, let me just repeat the point, that yes, we were very clear, we didn't hide it, right? Because we went to Parliament, right, with the amount of debt calculated, and it was the basis of that Parliament approved the levies that were to be paid. And so if we are going to be talking about energy debt that the Mahama administration left, let's be principled and add the revenue from the levy. Remember, this was to be one of the nuisance taxes that should have gone away. And it tells us that the substantive taxes were not nuisance after all, because they are still bringing in substantial amount of revenue.
Is it not because the GRA itself has not been seen to be able to rake in the needed revenue? A lot of loopholes within those systems.
No, but this is revenue in addition to what GRA was bringing. Remember, we went to Parliament, so this was additional revenue dedicated, right? Like we dedicate 2.5% to get fund, 2.5% of the VAT to NHIL. This was dedicated. So it had nothing to do with what GRA was bringing in or not. And I'm saying the report is proving that it is healthy, it is bringing in, because you pay at the pump. It's only, let me finish. Right? It's only the portion, right? It's only the portion, which is withheld by UCG and others, some of which is not being paid in, but it's held, right? So that's the first point. Second point, 1 oil field versus 3. So besides the energy sector levy, I don't have that report here, the ABFA, as I said earlier, is bringing in about 3 times the amount of money, which we were getting with 1 oil field.
Which is a law that you put in place in terms of petroleum revenue sharing and all that.
Yes.
ABFA, Heritage Fund,
and remember I said that
Wealth Fund and all that.
Exactly. And remember I said that, we've even stopped funding the infrastructure fund. We've even stopped funding using the sinking fund, to pay down debt, which is why, the debt is going up.
But the laws that were promulgated during your times are very clear on what should be done, even though there are vague natures in terms of when it comes to the ABFA, what it says project, and project is vague. Somebody will say project is vague.
You know what, I agree with Ghanaians who say that, why don't we use part, if not all, of our oil revenue to do landmark projects?
Yes.
Let me tell you that we listened, and that was the reason for setting up the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. Because remember, Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, you won't see it in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. Mm-hmm. But we set it up and we said the main sources of revenue was going to be three actually.
Yeah.
One was going to be the additional 17.5%, because we had come to a point where, because of wages, interest payments, and the rest, right, almost all revenue was going to recurrent expenditure. So when the VAT was increased to 17.5, you know, similar to other sub-Saharan Africa, we said, let's dedicate that. It's going into the budget, but it should go for infrastructure projects.
Okay.
So that we can do infrastructure like Nkrumah is doing, which we have come lately to appreciate is important. So that was the first source. The second source was a portion of ABFA, which went the 70% that's supposed to use for infrastructure, which is littered all over the place. We said, why don't we ring-fence part of that money for capital expenditure and use it to leverage the markets for borrowing, so that we can use it as oil revenue together with the projects.
Well, so the debate about Ghana's rising debt stock will continue, especially on your discussion platforms. But you can get more of these uploads through my Joy Online TV, which is on YouTube. In the meantime, though, check out our various social media platforms on Facebook, JoyNews on TV, and through our Twitter handle, JoyNews on TV. But in the meantime, we have to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have the Honorable Member of Parliament for Sanerigo in the studio. ABA Fuseni is our guest with Mama Vio Swabwaje. Stay with us. We have great things to discuss.